I'm here with Nataly Kogan, who is an entrepreneur, and she is most pertinently an author of a book called Happier Now. You've got a copy right there in your hand, right? Oh, it's the other way around. There it is, called Happier Now, and you're wearing your signature colors today. Yeah, and you just gave an amazing keynote this morning.
I did.
But I feel like we'd be doing it we wouldn't be doing it justice if we didn't hear a little bit about your personal story, because I think that that's such a powerful piece of who you are.
It is. It is. So, as I shared with you earlier, so my story begins in a really odd place. I grew up in what used to be called the Soviet Union, which is Russia. And when I was 13 years old, my parents and I escaped. We were Jewish, so we were persecuted at the time, and we escaped with a couple suitcases and a couple $100 to our name, and we spent about 3 months in refugee camps in Europe, first in Vienna and then in Italy. And we're very, very grateful to get permission to come to the United States, and we landed outside of Detroit in the projects, living on welfare and food stamps, very happy to have a way to get started. And, you know, we were so happy to finally be in America. This was always a dream, but I, at 13, was just overwhelmed by so much fear and, you know, self-doubt and anxiety, because I went from, you know, being a really smart student in Russia to being in, you know, remedial English classes because I couldn't speak English, and, you know, the kids.
I was born in this country, so I grew up speaking English. I can't even imagine what it'd be like to not speak English and have to deal with how kids are these days.
Well, especially in 8th grade. Remember 8th grade? We're not the nicest people in 8th grade, and, you know, I had like 2 outfits to my name and weird cloth sneakers. So it was a rough period for me, and I remember just wanting to feel something opposite to what I was feeling, happy, joy. And I noticed that the times where I felt the most joyful is when I achieved something. So, you know, when I got a good grade, or when I got moved out of remedial English, when I got eventually into a great school and a great college. And so I came up with this kind of idea that I am going to become so happy if I just achieve a lot of things, you know, become very successful, take care of all the things in my life, take care of my parents, and then I'll be happy. And so I kind of started to live my life that way with this.
And you went to like achievement on steroids, right? Like at the end, you were like living in New York, working for McKinsey. You went to Weslyan. I mean, you kind of ticked every box that every overachieving woman would ever tick.
I ticked every box plus some. I mean, the story I tell, by the time I was 30, I was living in New York City, which was my dream.
Yeah.
I had a little daughter. I had married my college sweetheart, Avi. I was a managing director at a venture capital firm.
Yeah.
Fewer than 6% women are in venture capital firms.
Absolutely.
I had started a publishing company out of our 1-bedroom apartment on the side with my husband.
Wow.
I had a contract with Hyperion to write a book for women, and I was just on TV. And that was me at 30. And you would think, like, oh my God, like you had it all.
I would be so happy.
I would be so happy.
And yet you were not happy.
I wasn't just not happy. I mean, I really was hardly functioning. I was so exhausted. I was so burnt out. I wasn't enjoying any of this life that I had built. I wasn't really, I mean, it really hurts me to say this now, but like, I wasn't really there for my daughter fully. Like, I wasn't there with my husband. I just was kind of going through the motions, and I just remember feeling so much dread, just like dread to get through every day. And by the way, also guilt for why don't I feel happy if I have everything that I've ever wanted, and look how hard I had to work to achieve it.
Well, you've touched on a really key point, which is busyness is the key killer of happiness. And so I actually want to catapult into some real tactical advice to give the folks that are watching this interview. What could they do on a daily basis? You have a couple of tips for people to feel happiness every day, every moment, not just like when they go on vacation to like Turks and Caicos.
Right, right, absolutely. Which, by the way, just to say on that, I used to think, like many of us do, right, this I'll be happy when. And I'm certain so many of you watching, we've all felt that, like I'll be happy when I get that job or go on vacation.
Yeah.
Research actually shows that the greatest life satisfaction that we feel is when we have frequent positive small experiences. So the joy is really in the everyday moments.
Yeah.
And that's what I discovered when I ran into research on happiness, and that's how I changed my life, and that's why I wrote my book, and I found it happier. But here's my favorite, like, couple tactical things. So 11,000 different scientific studies show that developing a practice of gratitude. So what does that mean? It means that every day you pause several times a day and you capture something you're grateful for. It can be really small, like I'm really grateful that I got to have a great cup of coffee in peace this morning.
Yeah.
Or I'm grateful that a friend texted me to say hi. Or I'm grateful that my boss said I was doing a good job.
And the timing is key, because you need to do that before you send that first bloody email of the morning.
You know how we get our inbox and we look at it and we're like, we're gone for the day? So my favorite way to do that is I call it 3 gratitudes before your first email. So before you send your first email for the day, can you write down 3 things you appreciate? The more specific and the littler, the better. Because the more that you do that, your brain actually trains itself to find more of those little good moments in your everyday life.
And then the other piece that I remember you saying is that, yes, you've got to feel the good moments and the happiness, but you've also got to really give yourself permission to feel the sadness. Yes. Because the sadness really illuminates the happiness.
There is no light without the darkness. And this was a huge mistake that I was making for so long in my life. I used to think that happiness meant always feeling positive. And I could never feel that way. So I thought I was failing at happiness, right? Because we live in this world that constantly says, like, turn your frown upside down, right? But actually, when you allow yourself, when you give yourself permission to feel your difficult feelings, stress, anxiety, sadness, your inner emotional immune system, which we all have, your inner resilience, helps you experience those emotions for less amount of time and with less intensity. So the weirdest thing I say is, I do these big speeches. I'm an expert on happiness, and one of the most important skills is learning how to allow yourself to feel unhappy sometimes, because when you allow yourself to do that, you actually get through that faster, and your inner resilience kicks in to help you. And also, to your point, the greatest life satisfaction we feel when we experience a range of emotions, because those times that we get through sadness or challenge, they illuminate, they make those everyday moments of joy that much brighter.
What about self-compassion and self-care? Because I'm somebody who's, and my friends will say it, like, I'm so hard on myself, and that's something that you really got to get under control, right? If you're going to be truly happy.
Truly happy. I mean, the thing I always ask my audience is, and I'm asking you, the viewer, when you make a mistake, what does the voice in your head say? Does it react with kindness and compassion? Or are you really mean and harsh towards yourself? And for most of us, the way we react to ourselves when we make a mistake is extremely harsh. We would never talk to people we love that way. And so we have to practice the skill of self-compassion. That's the other thing. I talk about happiness as a skill because we can practice. And so my favorite exercise is when you notice yourself being mean to yourself, as we all are, right? And holding ourselves up to those impossible standards. Can you take a pause? And can you reframe what you just said to yourself as if you're talking to someone that you love? Actually imagine that person. I always imagine my daughter Mia. She's 13. So whenever I catch myself being mean to myself, I pause and I say, okay, if I was talking to Mia, how would I say it? And I actually reframe it. And the more that you do that, you actually help yourself learn to treat yourself with that compassion. And the one thing I want to say about that is research shows that self-compassion increases your motivation. So when you treat yourself with self-compassion, it increases your motivation to improve and to work harder. So often people tell me that they're not self-compassionate because they feel like it's letting themselves off the hook. It's the opposite. Being kind to yourself actually helps you have more energy and fuel to improve and work harder towards things that matter to you.
Wow, that's an interesting piece that I didn't anticipate you saying. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I want to highlight your book because there's so many other great tips that you can still get if you get happier now. When did it hit the store shelves?
Just 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Brand new.
And you're able to get it on Amazon, I assume?
It's on Amazon, it's at your favorite local bookstore, it's wherever you love. And I just have to tell you, in addition to being filled with useful info, it's also so pretty.
It's yellow.
And it's yellow,
just like
and
your
it's
jacket.
Soft, and there's joy in it, and there's a lot of practical. I think there's something like 37 1-minute practices in there to help you be happier.
And we just highlighted a few, and I really love providing just a little bit of a resource for people with these interviews, so it tees up all the other stuff that you can go and research on your own. Nataly Kogan, thank you so much for sharing your story with me, with sharing all your tips today, and we're going to work on being a little bit happier today as a result of this interview. We're at the Baccarat Hotel. I'm Joya. This is Nataly. Happy Thursday.